electricity bills are spiking in the US. After holding pretty steady for decades, they started climbing in 2021 and haven't really stopped. A lot of wind and solar farms were built around that time, leading some people to blame them for rising costs.
Wind is a disaster.
If you want to go green, it has real cost.
Wind is the most expensive form of energy.
This may seem like classic politics, but it got me thinking. The prices of wind and solar have actually been plummeting for years. So why hasn't this cheaper energy lowered bills for Americans? Well, some people blame AI and data centers.
Definitely the customers get saddled with the bill.
So are we footing the bill for these massive computing complexes? And what are the other causes of rising electricity costs hardly anyone is talking about? Untangling this involves a complicated web of regional monopolies, unreliable data, and industry secrets. I spent months sifting through reports and interviewing experts to find out the truth behind booming electric bills. This is an attack ad from the governor's race in New Jersey, a state that saw a 22% jump in electricity costs this past year.
New Jersey's electric bills tripled this summer after double-digit rate hikes. Yet Cheryl said,
"We need to move into clean power. It's going to cost you an arm and a leg, but if you're a good person, you'll do it."
This ad is misleading for multiple reasons. First, the quote is taken totally out of context. Cheryl was giving an example of bad messaging and was arguing literally the opposite of what the ad implies. Second, it's pointing the finger at clean power for the state's rising bills. So let's talk about the cost of renewables. The global average cost of building new wind and solar energy has fallen dramatically. For solar panels, this yellow line here, it's fallen 90% since 2010. Onshore and offshore wind have both fallen more than 60% in that time. In much of the US, building new grid-scale solar is actually cheaper than new natural gas, even without tax credits. New Jersey has doubled its installed solar power in less than a decade, increasing its supply of cheaper energy. So what's behind the rising bills? Well, like with other goods, the price of electricity is influenced by both supply and demand. New Jersey's supply has not been growing fast enough, mostly due to a giant backlog of proposed energy generation projects that haven't been built because they're caught up in slow, bureaucratic processes. The organization that approves those requests is PJM Interconnection. It's a grid operator, and it helps plan out energy supply to meet expected demand and avoid shortages. PJM is the largest one in the US. It covers more than 67 million Americans in 13 states and DC. This map shows how many proposed renewable energy projects are waiting for PJM approval. In 2023, that queue of projects added up to more than 250 gigawatts of power. For context, the current total capacity in the PJM region is only about 180 gigawatts. Those proposed projects won't all be approved, but still, that's a lot of potential supply waiting in line.
The wait times have just skyrocketed over the last 5 to 10 years. Recent estimates have placed them at around 8 years to interconnect to the grid.
Delays like this drive up bills for everyone in the region, including New Jersey. Supply isn't growing fast enough to keep up with surging demand. One report found that without major reforms to this slow interconnection process, residential electricity bills in the region would rise 60% by 2040. But with reforms, prices could go down by 7% in that same period. In an email, PJM said it is making reforms, and also mentioned that some projects are already PJM approved, but held up by local opposition and supply chain delays. So yeah, which seems like better material for a 30-second ad, explaining what a grid operator is and how its wonky approval process works, or blaming Democrats and clean energy? New Jersey is an interesting case study, but we also have broader data available. According to a peer-reviewed report from the nonpartisan Lawrence Berkeley National Lab in the US, there is no significant correlation between higher prices and deployment of utility-scale solar and wind. And in fact, its comprehensive study of the last 5 years found the states with the largest increase in solar and wind appear, if anything, to have experienced price decreases.
When you add a low-cost resource to a system, it lowers prices and contributes to reliability, period.
The study did find one way adding these energy sources can push prices up, and that's in states with renewable portfolio standards, basically laws that require the use of a certain amount of renewable energy. When producing wind and solar energy is required, even if they're more expensive, that can drive up prices. In this report, it's not as strong an effect as other factors, but it did push up prices in some states, including Virginia. In case it wasn't clear yet, there's not one neat and tidy explanation for what controls electricity prices. Unsurprisingly, we see a lot of oversimplification when politicians discuss these problems across the political spectrum. The whole conversation around electricity prices is dominated by the question of which type of energy is best: gas versus wind, renewables versus fossil fuels, and so on. And those are really important decisions. But in terms of the cost of electricity, that might actually be the wrong debate. Providing electricity has three main phases: generation, transmission, and distribution. Transmission lines, the power lines you see driving down the highway, are an unsexy but essential piece of the energy puzzle, one that tends not to get as much attention as generation.
It's kind of the great integrator of all the resources, so it really provides a lot of, a big sort of safety net and cushion for the whole power system.
The Berkeley lab says that in the past 5 years, utility spending on generation has gone down, but spending on the other categories, transmission and distribution, has steadily risen.
The need to modernize the grid or even just maintain the grid has gotten more expensive, and that has been a pretty significant driver of rate increases as well.
This helps explain why many people's bills are going up, even though so many cheap renewables have come online. It also means that lowering costs might mainly be a question of poles and wires. Spending on this infrastructure can take a lot of different forms, including basic maintenance, repairs after storms, and building new lines to connect new energy sources like wind and solar. But that study from Berkeley Lab mainly points to spending on refurbishment and replacement, rather than for new energy sources, as cost drivers. That's simply because a lot of the grid is getting old. A lot of the system was built in the middle of the last century.
70 years is pretty darn good, but they don't last forever.
Utility companies across the U.S. have already started replacing aging parts, but it's going to take a while.
And it takes time to go out and replace the equipment that needs to be replaced, especially when there are still supply chain constraints that we're dealing with kind of years after the pandemic.
As you can see here, the costs of the equipment that make up the grid, things like transformers and cables, have risen far faster than the rate of inflation, this blue line at the bottom. The consulting firm Brattle Group estimates U.S. utilities are spending more than $10 billion per year on replacing aging transmission infrastructure. Most electric bills have a delivery portion that includes the transmission and distribution costs, and those costs are not likely to fall anytime soon. The good news is that the aging grid can present an opportunity to build something more modern and efficient. But the bad news is that the industry is having to make these expensive upgrades at the same time it's facing another huge change: surging demand. The U.S. actually had pretty flat power demand for more than a decade.
Power demand really was going just like 0.5% per year just until very recently.
But now, things have changed. That growth is expected to double this decade. Our electric grid is not prepared for this. This infrastructure takes time to build, and the industry is really not used to surprises. So what's driving the surge? Well, lots of things. We're seeing a new manufacturing boom, with more and more factories being announced and built. More people are driving electric vehicles, and more people are using electricity to heat their homes. More industries are electrifying their equipment, including, funnily enough, the oil and gas industries. And crucially, the climate is changing. This affects both consumers and suppliers of electricity. More extreme temperatures cause people to run more heat in the winter and more AC in the summer. Climate change leads to more severe storms, which cause utilities to spend a lot more on weatherproofing and repairs. Just look at Texas. Residential electricity prices have risen nearly 30% in 4 years, partly because utilities there are still paying for grid repairs after devastating winter storms in 2021 and passing that cost on to customers. Those storms led to days-long deadly blackouts, which Governor Greg Abbott also quickly blamed on renewables.
It just shows that fossil fuel is necessary for the state of Texas as well as other states.
Until an investigation found the blackouts resulted from a system-wide failure, and 58% of the unplanned outages were at natural gas plants. Today, Texas has the greatest total wind, solar, and battery capacity of any state. And it's maybe not surprising that when its electricity costs have risen, some people have said, yet again, that renewables are the problem. In July, the Wall Street Journal's editorial board came out swinging against wind and solar and blamed them for higher utility bills in Texas. A conservative think tank made a similar argument on its website in February. Both the Wall Street Journal and the think tank pieces say wind and solar energy are expensive because they're inconsistent. If the sun isn't shining or the wind isn't blowing, they can require backup power from peaker plants, a type of gas-powered plant that's built to turn on fast but is a lot less efficient than most standard gas plants. The authors imply this expensive backup power cancels out the cost savings from cheap renewables. But experts I spoke with said that's not how it works.
As if every wind and solar resource has to be backed up by a peaker plant? Not even close. I'm not even sure how many peakers you need.
Wind and solar are, by the way, naturally complementary. Solar power peaks at daytime, and wind tends to peak at night. But sometimes they do need backup. The good news is that grid operators have gotten a lot better at balancing renewables with other energy sources over the last decade or so.
You've got engineers and other problem solvers at these grid operators. They saw a problem, they work to solve the problem or to manage it, right?
We're also seeing more and more renewables backed up by fields of batteries instead of fossil-powered plants. Also, Texas is just a strange state to focus on for this argument.
Retail power prices in Texas are just, they're ordinary. They're better than ordinary. They're below the national average, and they have been during this huge ramp up in renewable energy production.
Michael Giberson, an energy economist at the center-right think tank R Street Institute, analyzed electricity prices in Texas, which has lots of renewable energy capacity, against 3 states with very little: Alabama, Mississippi, and West Virginia. Of those states, prices rose the least in Texas over the last 7 years.
If the story that the Wall Street Journal was telling was true, we ought to see prices going way up in Texas and coming down in these other states. And we're not seeing that, right? In fact, it was kind of the reverse.
Compared to Texas, California, Hawaii, and the Northeast saw much larger increases as supply shortages played out across the country. In the context of this energy crunch, the last thing we need is a technological revolution that requires unheard of amounts of power, but that's what we're facing right now. A lot about the future of AI remains uncertain, but it's transforming our physical world already. ChatGPT and other AI tools rely on data centers, basically warehouses full of computer servers and cooling equipment. These nondescript buildings keep the entire internet buzzing along: emails, online shopping, cat photos, etc. But the rise of AI dramatically increased the size and number of data centers being built. The International Energy Agency estimates data centers will drive more than 20% of the growth in electricity demand between now and 2030. Amazon, Google, and Meta are just a few of the companies investing heavily in them. In 2023, U.S. data centers consumed 176 terawatt hours of electricity. That's more than the entire country of Sweden used that year. And the Department of Energy estimates that data center energy usage could triple by 2028.
That's a kind of scale that we've never really seen. It's pretty unprecedented.
My colleague Hannah Beckler has been investigating data centers for over a year. She found more than 1,200 of them cropping up in clusters across the country. And of course, there are probably many more on the way, but we don't know how many.
Is there an upper limit? I don't know. Big tech isn't acting like there is.
This uncertainty poses a problem for the grid. Utilities and investors have to make decisions now based on what they expect energy demand will be years from now. It also poses a problem for our electricity bills. Usually, when a utility adds a new power source or new transmission to its service area, it'll spread the cost out among all the users there. This system made sense when it was designed more than a century ago.
The utility business model is about 120 years old, and it was designed by policymakers to spread electrification.
But if the only reason that expansion is needed is to support one giant data center, then sharing the costs does not make as much sense. A report from Harvard Law researchers says this system could be transferring big tech's energy costs to the public. We also know it's common for utilities to offer data centers discounted rates to secure their business.
Utilities are competing with each other to attract these computing complexes, which can be a real profit driver for them. And in order to attract those new customers, they may be forcing everybody to foot the bill of providing service to these data centers.
To be clear, tech companies generally deny this is happening.
We hear from the tech companies that they want to pay their way. We don't actually know that that is happening because of the use of confidentiality clauses.
I asked Meta, Amazon, Google, and QTS for comment. Meta didn't get back to me. The other three actually pointed me to the Berkeley Lab study we've been talking about. It found that states with the biggest increase in electricity demand actually saw reductions in prices. That's because a lot of your electric bill is a fixed cost. think the cost of a construction project, that gets spread out over every customer. Sometimes, if a data center comes to town, it's simply another large customer that can help share those costs. However, it only works that way if the grid in that area is already set up to handle that new facility. But if the utility has to build new transmission lines to make room for a new data center, those costs can be an issue. The question is whether tech companies are covering those costs or not. In an email, an Amazon spokesperson said the company covers the full cost of infrastructure specific to its operations. Some tech companies and news coverage have already claimed the Berkeley Lab study proves data centers don't raise costs. That is not the case. The study identifies this whole question as a knowledge gap that needs further research. In Virginia, now the data center capital of the world, Dominion Energy applied for permission to build $23 million worth of transmission lines and a new substation. A state official said that project likely would not be needed if not for a data center's request. The commission approved Dominion's request, but added an interesting comment that the 800-pound gorilla of who pays for new transmission facilities looms large. This year, the state regulator approved Dominion's request to raise its rates 9%. But it also set up new payment requirements for industrial customers designed to protect regular people from data center costs. And remember, there's still a lot of uncertainty around future data centers. The news about AI seems to change every week, so I think it's safe to say no one has any real idea what the situation will look like in 2039. A report from the Southern Environmental Law Center says some predictions of future data center electricity demand might be overhyped, and that utilities embrace those high-end estimates because it can be good for business and make it easier to get more natural gas projects approved. The major problem with this is we don't know if we actually need them. These estimates might be inflated mainly because the tech companies building the data centers tend to shop around. They'll submit multiple proposals to see where they get the best deal.
We have way more, maybe 10 times more proposed sites than we will have actual sites. And that's just how the business works.
Because our utilities are divided by region, there aren't necessarily easy ways to cross-check to see if the same project has been pitched in two places. So it could easily be counted as two future data centers, even when only one will actually be built.
There's no question that there is double counting happening.
The SELC says some of these huge estimates simply can't come true because there wouldn't be enough computer chips to build that many data centers.
If all this load attributable to data centers were to come online, it would account for over 90% of the global supply of chips, which is highly improbable, if not impossible.
You would think this could be good news, right? Maybe the industry won't strain the grid as much as we initially thought. Well, not quite. Overbuilding energy infrastructure is a problem. It might end up underutilized or stranded, but we'll all still have to pay for it. Even if it doesn't end up stranded, it's still a problem to build natural gas plants we don't need. They create air pollution that contributes to asthma and release the powerful greenhouse gas methane. So here's the pickle we find ourselves in. We're blaming renewables for rising electricity costs when the bigger culprit is the climate crisis. One of the most effective ways of addressing climate change is reducing our dependence on fossil fuels. But instead, we're using the rising costs to justify more natural gas, which will worsen climate change. Right now, gas is still the largest piece of the U.S. electricity pie. And as the U.S. leans into exporting that gas, leaving less for the American market, it'll likely push up domestic prices. Meanwhile, the Department of Energy has started ordering fossil-powered plants that had been set to retire to remain open. The rationale being that we're in a race to meet energy demand from AI, so we need all the power we can get. That's more bad news for electricity bills. These plants were closing for economic reasons. They were more than 50 years old, and their operators and regulators decided they were too expensive and not needed.
Somebody has to foot the bill when you keep an uneconomic resource on the power system. Those costs are inevitably going to flow to ratepayers.
So far, the DOE has used emergency orders, normally used to keep extra power available during hurricanes, to keep 2 old fossil-powered plants from retiring. But towards the end of this year, more plants are slated to retire.
I think at the end of this year, there may be many more of these orders coming and ratepayers may get a lump of coal in their stocking for Christmas.
And if the department keeps open every fossil-powered plant that's scheduled to retire during the remainder of the Trump administration through 2028, that could be 90 costly and inefficient plants staying online. Michael Goggin estimates this would cost ratepayers up to $5.9 billion. To To sum it up, we have an old grid, inflation, natural gas prices, resurgent manufacturing, electrification, climate change, a complex energy transition underway, and an AI boom that could possibly end up being an AI bubble, all colliding to make this one of the most difficult times in history to bring down electricity costs. And we haven't really even talked about the elephant in the room. Most Americans get their electricity from a for-profit company that answers to shareholders, not the ratepayers. About 3/4 of Americans get their electricity from an investor-owned utility, or IOU. These are for-profit utilities with shareholders, and they include publicly traded companies like Duke Energy, Dominion Energy, PSE&G, and so on. And they are regional monopolies, for a pretty good reason.
The power network really is like a classic natural monopoly where it really makes sense to have one company run the lines down the street rather than having competing wires go into our neighborhoods.
So if you want power, most Americans have no choice but to get it from the one company in the area. But each state has a regulator to keep that company in check, approving what it charges and setting an allowed rate of return on investments in new infrastructure. Experts I spoke with said this model can create some bad incentives.
There's just no incentive for utilities to pursue efficiency. They have every incentive to pursue the most costly solutions.
We have ways to make the most of what we already have, including investing in high-capacity interregional transmission to move power to where it's most needed. And recent technological innovation could make a big difference too.
There's something called grid-enhancing technologies, for instance, that can basically get more juice flowing over the current system, which may be a very cost-effective way to avoid massive new construction projects.
But investor-owned utilities make their profits through those projects. They typically break even on electricity sales, and the real money comes from returns on investments like power plants and transmission lines. Those rates of returns are usually about 10%. So if an IOU spends $1 million building a new gas plant, it can make back $100,000 in profit over the life of that plant. And we know these companies are doing pretty well for themselves. Just look at what some of the biggest IOUs in the country have made in profits so far this year. The Berkeley lab also found that prices at IOUs are higher and have risen faster than at publicly owned utilities. Meanwhile, in 2024, about a third of U.S. households cut back or went without necessities to pay an energy bill. That number went from 5% to 34% in just 3 years. During that time, most of our elected officials have steered the conversation toward the question of how we should generate power: gas, coal, wind, solar, maybe nuclear. It's a lot easier to point the finger at whatever power source your political party dislikes, rather than do the hard work of fixing outdated systems. But there might be a growing bipartisan appetite for those changes. Last year, a new rule from FERC, the Federal Energy Regulator, ordered utilities to plan for and consider a lot of changes, including those grid-enhancing technologies and better transmission planning. And maybe, just maybe, data centers will end up being the shock to the system we need to change the conversation around electricity pricing. If you're curious about the sources I used for this video, I made a reading list for you, and it's linked in the video description.